Welcome to the World Affairs Council of the Monterey Bay Area. We hope you enjoyed the following quick take on international affairs while we all wait out the COVID pandemic. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Lipman, history professor at Mount Holyoke College in Western Massachusetts, now retired. Today's topic is Muslims and Islam in China, with a focus on the Uyghurs. This topic has been much in the news lately, and I hope we can talk about it after I give you a brief presentation with a general introduction to this issue. First, let me introduce you to some terms that are important for our understanding of this region and this topic. The word Uyghur refers to the Turkic-speaking Muslim inhabitants of the area called Alti-Shahr and other parts of Xinjiang province, now numbering about 12 million people. Alti-Shahr means 6 cities, and it's the local name for the oasis cities, some of them very large, surrounding the Tarim Basin or the Taklamakan Desert. All of this takes place in Xinjiang, the northwesternmost province of China. Xinjiang means new frontier or new dominion, and it was conquered by the Qing Empire in the 1750s. It is now an autonomous region of the People's Republic of China. Many Uyghur nationalists reject the name Xinjiang and call the region Eastern Turkestan. This word is forbidden in the People's Republic of China. Please don't use it there. The majority ethnic group of China, the people we would call the Chinese or the culturally Chinese, call themselves the Han, and they now number over 1 billion souls, found everywhere in the world. The last imperial dynasty of China was called Qing, which is spelled Q-I-N-G. The Qing ruled parts of the Chinese culture area starting in the 1630s, conquered the entire Chinese culture area by 1682, and lasted until 1912. The Qing Empire at its height was roughly coterminous with the current People's Republic of China, actually a little larger. This is Eurasia. You all learned in school that it's 2 continents, but it's also obviously 1 continent. Xinjiang, the area with which we're concerned today, is here, in the center of this vast continent. It's the eastern extremity of Central Asia, and it is also the northwesternmost part of what we now call China. That is to say, it's a between place. It has also been a crossroads for millennia. And as you can see, it sits not just between Central Asia and China, but also between Mongolia and Tibet, a very strategic location at the intersection not only of cultures, but of trading systems and of military ambitions. This is the People's Republic of China as currently defined. Xinjiang is its northwestern corner. About 1/6 of the land area of the People's Republic of China is Xinjiang, which is roughly 3 times the size of France. It's enormous. Topographically, it's made up of 2 flat areas. The southernmost is the Taklamakan Desert here, also called the Tarim Basin, and the northern plains, sometimes called Jungaria or Dzungaria, are an extension eastwards of the Kazakh steppe here. These areas are separated by the Tian Shan Mountains here, very tall mountains, but even taller are the Pamirs here, the Karakorums here, and the Kunlun here. That is to say, Xinjiang is surrounded on 3 sides by mountains, by very high mountains, some of them over 20,000 feet. It is also surrounded by other cultures, as I mentioned before, Mongolia to the northeast, Kazakhstan and the other cultures of Muslim Central Asia to the northwest and the west, India to the southwest through the Kashmir Mountains, and Tibet to the south. The connection eastward to China is through this corridor here, the Gansu Corridor, the only easy way to get to China from Xinjiang. Xinjiang is an extremely diverse region, as you would expect of someplace 3 times the size of France. It includes river valleys, very lush, suitable for agriculture and for pastoralism. It contains oases, most of them watered by snowmelt from the high mountains on their edges. The arid areas in between are exceedingly arid, as you see in the lower right-hand corner, and the mountains, as I said, are very tall. The towns of Xinjiang, which was an ancient trading center, among other things, were made out of baked brick, adobe. But the modern towns, of course, are modern towns. As you see in the right-hand corner, this is the great oasis of Kashgar. This is an oasis. Its water comes primarily from snowmelt from the high mountains to its west and southwest. This oasis now has a population pushing up toward 1 million people. These are the folks who live there. These are Uyghurs. As you can see, they are Turkic in their ethnic origin. They don't look like our idea of what Chinese people look like. They practice as many professions as any ethnic group of 12 million souls might. They have students, vegetable sellers in the marketplace, men who go to the mosque, sisters who go to the market. In the center, we see Rebia Kadir, probably the only Uyghur of whom you might have heard. She was a wealthy businesswoman in Xinjiang, but ran afoul of the state, received a multi-year sentence for a variety of crimes, which in all likelihood she did not commit, and was finally freed as part of an American-Chinese deal in the 1990s. She now lives in the United States. Uyghurs are, among other things, Muslims. Their mosques are very similar to those of Central Asia. Very often, the worshippers pray outdoors because, after all, it never rains there or almost never rains there. And as you see in the photograph upper right, they do not look Chinese. That is to say, they are not Han people. They are not the people we would call the Chinese, though they are all citizens of China. The story of Xinjiang is a long and complicated one. Unfortunately, I don't have time to tell it today, but much of the modern version of this story starts with an invasion of Xinjiang from the west, from the Khanate of Kokand, by this fellow, Yaqub Beg, a military guy who brought his army over the Pamir and set up a state in Xinjiang as Amir, that is, as Islamic ruler, in the 1860s. The state lasted until 1877, and its reconquest by the Qing, led by the general in the upper left-hand corner, Zuo Zongtang, was first of all brutal, and second of all, effective. From that point on, all of Xinjiang was incorporated more effectively than it had ever been into a Chinese-based state. That's not to say it was well integrated. In the first half of the 20th century, it was ruled by military men, people we would now call warlords. These 3 Chinese, all Han, ruled with varying degrees of effectiveness over this vast area, with varying degrees of loyalty to the central government of their day. Their troops were largely Muslims, but not Uyghurs. They were Chinese-speaking Muslims, who would now be called Hui. These folks occupied an in-between role. They were Chinese by culture and language, but they were Muslims by religion. So it was thought that they would have a better relationship with the local Muslim folks in Xinjiang. That did not turn out to be true, and the relationship between Uyghurs and Hui in Xinjiang remains a vexed one. In the 1950s, Xinjiang became part of the People's Republic of China, which we called Communist China or Red China. And the industrial exploitation of the Xinjiang natural resources rapidly increased from that point on. Those resources included natural gas and oil, mineral resources, especially jade, but also agriculture. And the northern part of Xinjiang, not Altishahr, but the northern Kazakh plains, became major centers for the production of cotton. They had the heat for it, and from the high snow mountains, they could get enough water. During the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s and 70s, Xinjiang was a site of social conflict like the rest of China, but it was given a very particular local flavor by the fact that the local people are Muslims and therefore believers in religion, which the Cultural Revolution authorities held to be mindless, ignorant superstition, all religion. And here we see as an idealized picture of Xinjiang during that period in which Chairman Mao himself comes to inspect the cotton fields and the happy Uyghur farmers, whereas in the left-hand picture we see an actual meeting place, a gathering place of Cultural Revolution Xinjiang, which was far from peaceful. It's really from the end of the Cultural Revolution in 1976 to 78 that Xinjiang becomes a thoroughly integrated part of the People's Republic of China and its opening and reform under Deng Xiaoping and his successors in the Communist Party. International and domestic air travel knitted Xinjiang much more closely to the world than it had ever been before. These 4 huge international air terminals are only a few of the many that were built during those years. Even more important, however, was the coming of the railroad. Very difficult to build a railroad across vast desert spaces, especially a desert as nasty as the Taklamakan. It didn't arrive in Kashgar at the western end of that desert until the year 2000. But at that point began a new influx into Xinjiang, an influx of Han people, mostly poor, mostly in search of work. They found construction work in the burgeoning oasis cities and the smaller towns, and they were regarded by many Uyghurs as outsiders, as interlopers. Though all citizens of China, their language and their lack of Islamic religion marked them as utterly other. To these incoming Chinese, of course, the Uyghurs, with their foreign language, that is, their non-Chinese language, their Turkic language, and their Islamic religion, could only be them. And so the stage was set for an ongoing and continuing conflict between groups. The Uyghur, who felt that their homeland was being invaded and turned into something it had never been, a non-Muslim place, and the Han immigrants, who felt that these very foreign Uyghurs did not participate in the onrushing modernity of their China. Violence, of course, was one of the results. In 2009, riots flared in a number of Xinjiang cities, caused initially by the murder of several Uyghurs very far away from Xinjiang, which was reported in the province. People went out into the streets. Violence resulted. We still don't know much about it. There were very few international eyewitnesses to this, so the only accounts we have are either by Uyghur exiles or by the Chinese state. Neither of these can be trusted to be entirely accurate. But other kinds of violence were taking place as well. Beginning in that same year, the old city of Kashgar, as well as the old cities, that is the Uyghur cities of the other oasis towns, were demolished. This was done under the guise of urban renewal, and indeed, building new and modern housing can be seen as an important function of a modern government. But Uyghur folks saw this as the destruction not simply of their homes, that's bad enough, but of their neighborhoods, of their communities, of their very way of life, especially when it involved the destruction of mosques, which it did. Remember that Islamic communities, like Christian communities or Jewish communities, center on their religious institutions. And the demolition of mosques, like this one in Kashgar, produced a disintegrating effect on Uyghur society, which was very powerful emotionally and very negative. Perhaps even more so was the destruction of shrines outside of the towns in the desert. These shrines, called mazars, were pilgrimage sites for Uyghurs who went there to communicate with long dead saints, to hear their own history recited, to participate in fairs and amusements, sharing of food, and a general sense of being Uyghur, which was centered on some of these shrines. And you can see the result of the destruction of these shrines by the Chinese state over the past decade. In 2011, the Imam Asim Shrine was a flourishing pilgrimage site. In 2019, it's a bare mound of sand. What you've probably read and heard about Uyghurs in the past decade, actually in the past 3 or 4 years, is that a million of them, perhaps more, have been put into concentration camps and re-educated. This euphemism for imprisoned is very common in current Chinese vocabulary, and you can see for yourselves what these camps look like. The Chinese state calls them schools, re-education centers, but satellite photographs reveal both their extent and the degree to which they resemble prisons. Uyghurs are sent to them for, putatively, terrorism, separatism, and extremism. What that means in practice is having any relationship at all with Islam. Islamic names for children have been forbidden. The observance of the Ramadan fast has been forbidden. Even the wearing of beards by Muslim men has been either forbidden or severely curtailed, as has the wearing of hijab or head covering by Muslim Uyghur women. That combination of, what shall we say, social controls has been imposed rather rapidly over the past 4 years in combination with these re-education centers. The people incarcerated in them are supposed to be educated against becoming terrorists, splitists or separatists, and extremists. Those are all Islamic faults in the eyes of the Chinese state, the proof of which is that there have indeed been Islamic terrorist attacks within China. In 2014, this is the worst of them. 29 people were killed in an attack by 4 or 5 or 8 Uyghur, they were called terrorists at the time. 4 of them were captured, 3 executed, and 1 jailed for life. That was sufficient evidence for the Chinese state to crack down not simply on Uyghurs who did these sorts of things, but on all Uyghurs, not just on Muslims who had in fact become extremists or separatists or terrorists, but on all Muslims. Now, what you've probably heard about this crackdown is that it involves the increasing power of a surveillance state. And that's where I'm going to end. That surveillance state is real. It involves control over people at an extraordinary level. We don't know exactly how many CCTV cameras there are in Xinjiang, but a former first party secretary, leader of that province, boasted that he could find anyone in Xinjiang, which you'll remember is 3 times the size of France, in 7 minutes. Anyone. And he probably could. That surveillance state is now being augmented by DNA databases. The Chinese state is taking DNA from every Uyghur to make an unambiguous identification possible well beyond an ID card or even facial recognition. This kind of surveillance is combined with the social credit score system, in which anybody who does anything seen as antithetical to state interests has points taken off. Anybody who informs on neighbors or otherwise cooperates with the state gets points. And something as innocent as having a cousin who goes to the mosque can be seen as a reason to take points off your social credit score. This dystopian vision of the state is now at least possible anywhere in China. Thus far, it has been enforced rigorously only in Xinjiang, but it is gradually being imposed, including the social credit score system, elsewhere. Other Muslims in China, including Chinese-speaking Muslims, are feeling it. And I have to end, I'm afraid, on a somewhat dystopian note. No one internationally has been able to do anything about this. No Muslim government has even spoken out against it, with the possible exception of Mr. Erdogan in Turkey, who does so occasionally. But there has been no consistent expression of resistance from Muslim communities outside of China. Why? China is too big, too powerful, too rich, too potent diplomatically, and too important a source of goods. And so I have to end on a rather negative note, I'm afraid. This is working. In Xinjiang, the society has been shut down. Uyghur society and culture are gradually being eroded to the point that some people are calling this ethnocide or cultural genocide. And there is no sign of any effective resistance to it, either inside or outside China. I'd be very eager to talk with you and to correspond with you about this and about any issues you might have regarding Islam and Muslims in China, and I thank you for your attention.